also carried that film, along with Ethan Hawke, who managed to bury his ego and become an idiot. Uh, More so a real idiot instead of the posing idiot he is. Um, no, he did a great job as her addled husband. So, and we saw a second film with Sally Hawkins called A Brilliant Young Mind about a mother whose son is a math savant. And she finally breaks through to him when he goes to a math contest, international math contest for high school students, and he sort of has a crush on a Chinese girl. And her uncle, who's heading the Chinese team, discovers them together and he sends her back home. So the boy is crestfallen, and Sally Hawkins, as his mother, tries to console him, but the only thing he understands is math. So she found a way of comparing love to mathematics. It's like, oh, so wonderful. It's like when you love somebody, you're more than one, and when you lose somebody, you're less than one. And the light bulb goes off in the kid's head. And who knows how they live happily ever after or not, but it's just she has this ability to carry a modest movie with heart. We've seen this is the third film. And what is this film? It's a true story. Um, there was such a woman. She did write a book. The movie is based on this book. My wise wife Janice pointed out while Googling, while we watched it, that there was a previous book from 1951 about, how, I mean, there are probably other books about how Richard III was not a bad guy. But that aside, like I always say, let's not let the facts ruin a good movie. Um, I found this film to be charming, and it's very seductive because it's so easy to like. It's easy to like because the characters and the performances are so winning. Even her husband, who's not the evil divorced husband, he's still loving. He even kisses her. And, she says, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And he says, "No, we shouldn't." It's very funny, despite all the family grief and then the disappointment that she gets. So this is an example like Maudie of a small film that carries a big message. Remember we discussed Jules a couple months ago about the alien who lands in the backyard of Ben Kingsley? And everybody thought he was crazy because he said there's an alien in my backyard, and they thought they meant an illegal alien. And this modest little film, if you haven't seen it, I so encourage you to see it. You will love it as much as this one. So there's something about this is what I want to talk about tonight because the film's pretty straightforward. But what is there about a small film that is so engaging? It's not a blockbuster. It doesn't have Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and Martin Scorsese didn't direct it, but it has a very sensitive cast and a very sensitive director. This one was directed by Stephen Frears, and I discovered it because I kept stumbling upon films that I liked and that I wanted to see. And as I went through his body of work, not all of it, I found this film and I watched it and I said, bingo, our group's going to love this. So let's keep that in the back of our minds, or in the backs of our minds. Uh, why did this film work on us? What's so damn charming about it? It doesn't, it didn't make much money. I didn't look up the figures, but why? Why did it work on us? And sort of that's sort of my pitch throughout all our discussions is we understand movies better when we figure out what they did to us and how they did it. So um, I made notes, just so I don't forget in the heat of the moment. Tomorrow I'd remember them better, but in the group I have to respond quickly. Um, the film starts off with she establishes her disability, and she doesn't get promoted at work when clearly her colleagues think she should. And she goes home, and we find out she's divorced, and the husband is just visiting to prepare dinner for the two boys. And then she goes to see a play with the older boy. And the play is Richard III by William Shakespeare. And there's this wonderful performance. You actually understand every phrase because the actor delivers them so clearly and with such meaning that you realize this guy he disgusts himself because dogs bark at him when he walks by. And it's really the performance informed the emotional psyche of the character in Shakespeare, Richard III. Now, what happens in that performance? Does somebody want to carry the mail for me? She's there with her older son, and there's a moment when he's almost looking at her and delivering his lines, and she's looking at him, and the camera zooms in very slowly. It's called a creep zoom to her. And you realize she's being taken over by this notion of Richard III, that he's pitiable, or that he may not have been a bad guy at all. He was just sensitive. At intermission, they go out and they talk to other parents because it's like a school function, right? And she gets into this veiled argument in the British way about Richard III and history, and uh, he was a bad guy or wasn't. And finally, she says to the dad, "Well, I don't believe that a disability would turn anybody into a villain." Well, she should, it sounds kind of cute and quaint in our era when all these slighted incels and young men with guns go out and shoot people, and because they perceive themselves as being inadequate. That said, I just want to bring it home to this notion that people can't help themselves uh, is present, or that they deserve no pity. And the funny thing is that the father says to her, "Well, it's just a play," to bail out of the discussion. And she said, "Yes, it is just a play." So they both win in that she's saying there could be some truth behind another story, not this one. So they go back in, and then they see the scene where Richard III is killed. And the Tudor, descendant of the Tudor group of the royal family, takes his throne. So let me go back with a little history. I didn't have enough time to research it thoroughly. Richard III came from the Plantagenets. They were known as a murderous clan. There's even a film about them, documentary. And they were divided into four groups that were called cadets. And as in any tribe, there are warring factions like Orthodox and Reform, or Shia and Sunni. It's like, or Catholics and Presbyterians. People take issue with those they should be closer to. And after Richard III is killed, the Tudor branch takes over and creates an empire of a royalty period of about 150 years. And it comes up later in the movie why that's important. I don't want to go into it now, but just so you know, the reason why his reputation was suppressed was because Shakespeare wrote this play about Richard III, which was very damning. It called him a hunchback. It said he killed his two nephews. It said he was mean, and dogs did bark at him when he walked by. That's pretty bad. If a dog senses you're not a good person, a dog will. Some dogs will do that unless you have food. And it's like it just makes it relevant, to me, especially the dog business, because I'm a dog person, and dogs do know something sometimes. Some are just dumb, but so are people. That was a joke in case you're a cat lover. So she sees this horrible scene where he's killed and deposed, and the Tudor family takes over the crown. And she knocks on the car door of the dad as they're leaving in the rain and says, "But she has to have the last word, because this is a passionate woman who's been touched by something. She doesn't even know it. She was not a crusader." Although, when she's not promoted in the first scene, we saw she goes straight to her boss and she says, "Well, if you want the younger crowd, maybe they have something on me because I'm over 40. I can't compete, but neither can you." It's a very funny line. And then as she leaves, "And by the way, the wax in your hair isn't convincing." And he says, "It's clay." It's like Frears and his co-writer have this, I don't even call it a dry British sensibility. It's sneaking the humor in that's still in character and so fitting with the story. It's not a joke at anyone's expense. It's character development. I mean, yeah, they want to sabotage the boss for being such an evil guy, or for overlooking her for the cute younger woman. But it's these British writers, they're so skilled at having fun with a concept. They say, "Well, no, she actually did have this sleeping disorder where she couldn't sleep." And that's in her book, which she wrote, which this is based on. But they have a way of helping the medicine go down. I mean, we saw that. By the way, Steve Coogan, who plays the husband, also co-wrote and starred in Philomena, another film we saw about a Catholic woman who delivered a child to nuns, and they took the child away, and she never saw the child again. And she, with Steve Coogan, a journalist, go on a search to find why was she taken away, and they discover this whole conspiracy at the convent of taking children away from unwed mothers. Lovely, sensitive film, and they actually track down her son. Uh, but so these are like sensitive feeling people who they have a track record of doing work that affects us. So they're not just, overgrown kids playing with the movies. They're serious, sensitive human beings and writers. So she corrects the dad and she says, by the way, you know, um, uh, you could be wrong. And he says, oh, okay, yeah. And he rolls up the window. Then she goes home, and for the first time, this is the first of so many instances, she sees the king in the courtyard outside her home, just sitting on a bench. No, sorry. She goes into a meeting the next day, and it's the courtyard of the office. And if you notice the facial expressions of the king every time we see him, they're very subdued. He doesn't nod and acknowledge her. He just sort of bends his head a little bit. And then at the end of that scene in the courtyard, there's a very slight wink. Plays it very cool, as does the director, Stephen Frears. So we know he's dressed in a crown and velvet robes. And I think we know right away, tell me if you didn't, that this was a figment of her imagination. Is that what your first sense of it? You can nod your heads. It's okay. And then she leaves work and she goes home and she sees the king outside her house. Wow. So she is being pursued by her own demons, or this aspect of her personality that is about to take hold. Because why? She needs it. She's sick. She's been looked over by promotion. She has a divorced husband who's still kind and loving enough. But her life, she needs something in her life. And in a way, I don't mean to speak too broadly of it, because this is, at the best, this is a psychological movie about her sense of self-esteem. But it's not that deeply psychological. It's how her coming self-awareness comes out of the plot, not out of wrestling with her demons. Although the king, what does the king represent? Does anybody want to try to answer that? At this point in the movie, do we know what the king represents to her? Come on, Jeffrey, you're the literati here. No, don't want to take the bait. Um, I think we've lost some people since we started. Okay. Can I call on Fern to help out, or no?
You can call on me, but I'm not sure what he represented. I mean, my own sense was that he represented the insecurities she had about herself and her own limitations, and he was like her alter ego.
Right. Her gentle coach who knew more than she did about herself. Yeah, Cindy.
I I felt he represented people being misjudged.
Yes, that too. Absolutely. And that was the appeal for Sally Hawkins, because that's what she says to the father at the school play, the performance. I can't believe that he was that bad, just because he had a humpback.
Well, she sees herself as ugly.
Yes, right. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. This is the point. She identifies with the mythic story of Richard.
Yeah.
Misjudged, misunderstood, not appreciated, and betrayed by those who shouldn't betray her, like her boss.
Right.
So the next scene is the morning, and it starts on the castle, where we went back to the castle where that big cannon is later in the movie. That is a Scottish castle. Maybe it was the Plantagenet Castle.
It was in Edinburgh.
Oh, Edinburgh, well, Scotland. But maybe you had to be pretty rich to build a place like that hundreds of years ago. So it could have been the king's palace. Just like isn't the current king and Queen Elizabeth, weren't they based in Scotland as well?
They are. That
Yeah.
wasn't their place. Barbara and I actually were just in that place this
Uh-huh. Good for you guys. So there's a tilt down from a castle, and in it, this is the next morning, we see her not walking to her job, but walking to a bookstore, right? It's a very funny scene. Again, this is the British touch. They take a moment where she says, "Do you have any books on Richard, King Richard?" And the clerk says, "Yes, I know who he was." "Well, we have 8 of them." And she said, "Okay, I'll take them." And she says, "Which one?" And she says, "All of them." It's like she's immediately branded as a strange person. And then she plays hooky the rest of the day and reads the book in the park. And takes notes. She's getting sucked in to this. At some point, what is it? It's magical realism, where it's still an agent on her reality, even though it doesn't exist. Right? It has agency in her life. But it's disconcerting to her. So she goes home, goes to bed alone. And she gets up and she looks out the window and she sees the king sitting on a bench outside her home. So she puts on a robe, so British, right? Well, anybody would, and goes down to see him. She says, um, "This is private property. You don't belong here. Go away." And he doesn't react. He's kind of stolid. But then the next day, she goes to a pub where the Ricardian Society of their suburb is meeting. And she eavesdrops and decides, oh, those are the 6 people that I want to meet. And so she meets this group of very different people. One guy, the very exuberant younger one, is a biker. He's got a leather vest like a Hell's Angels and a shirt that says Motor something on it. And then there's the older gentleman with gray hair. And then there's the Indian guy. And then there's the woman. It's like these are, I don't want to say caricatures because they're written and performed so well. They're characters that have an effect on her. And they welcome her into the group, but they welcome her, what she brings to it. And the guy in the motorcycle vest says, well, that's how history works. If you plant a lie and repeat it often enough, people will begin to believe it. Now, does this sound like contemporary America? And Cindy's, I mean, it's what, this is human nature. And of course, it comes from the mouth of some guy who probably didn't graduate high school. And somewhere in there, um, somebody says, well, this isn't really anything to build up your life. And she says, I'm not normal. So that's the key to her self-image, right? She's deprecating. She's not confident. She's too used to people putting her down, including her husband, we learn later. And then she says, I'd really like to find the grave. And they tell her there's no grave. She's such a novice at Richard research that she didn't know that. Then she sees the king again, and at night. And the next morning, he's in her home. And he says something to her. And she says, why didn't you talk to me? And he says, you never asked me. We've heard that in other movies. I don't remember where I've heard it. Oh, it's a Jerry Lewis line. The bellhop movie, silent film, sort of everybody talks, but Jerry Lewis, the bellhop. And at the end of the movie, the head of the hotel says, why don't you ever say anything? And he says, because you never asked me. And that's pretty much the end of the movie. So that's Lewis's humor. So it's that kind of mythical presence in her life. And then she begins to take up his side. And she tells, I forget who she says this to, that 500 years ago, you're innocent until proven guilty, were words uttered by Richard III. So he's the king who's about justice. And the Plantagenets did accept the Magna Carta, which contains that concept, I think. But they made a lot of military and economic trade-offs to stay in good graces with the rest of the continent. And then we see it come forward into the current time. she goes on Zoom with an expert, an American woman, who suggests she reach out to this other man, and he looks like an Elizabethan knight. You know, he's got the haircut of Richard III. And again, the British hand is at play here, where she says, "Oh, excuse me," after they talk, but you look astonishingly like Richard III. You know, your hair. And he kind of doesn't acknowledge it. And then later she says, "I want at the end, I want you to know it looks good on you." And I don't know if he registers a smile or not, but that's how the British writers keep us engaged and keep us coming back to her and the playfulness of the whole plot. By the way, I have to mention the music. Did anybody notice it throughout? The music at the credits? It's playful. It's a comedy. And it's Alexander Desplat, who's on fire now with half the hit movies that are made. And but he knew it was a comedy and he played it, but not like a ha-ha comedy. He knew how to underplay the humor. And it is an important force in I made a couple notes on where it's effective, but in engaging us with the characters. So they speak, and the Zoom with the expert leads her to the guy with the hair, and then she goes to the library because he tells her that's where the goods are buried. And there's a scene with her in the library with white gloves, and she has a vision. I forget. That's all I wrote. I forget what. Anybody remember what happened in the library scene? No. So then she goes to Lester, and she lies to her husband. Remember, he's moved out. They have two jobs, so he can afford his separate apartment. And she hasn't lied to him in the past, but he suspects she's gone somewhere. That's where she goes to the archaeologist and brings them a cake. And they politely do the bidding because one of her Ricardians called the mayor of Leicester and got this guy to talk to her. So nobody takes her seriously yet on the outside. And there's another comment about Richard III after he smiles at her. Richard III railed against the printing press. Printing press came in like 1450 with Gutenberg. And of course, that enabled the spread of lies as well as truthfulness. So the king doesn't like the printing press. And then she goes to a lecture, I think also in Leicester, where there's this arch academic, an older guy, white hair, who's talking about the Tudors. And she speaks up and interrupts him. And she says, "I strongly feel that he was innocent." And he humors her for a while and he hears her out. And he says, "Well, you know, the best historians in the world are against you. That settles that. And you're going with your feelings. You know, we don't, that's not the science of history. We don't go with feelings." But outside that, she meets this guy with another Ricardian haircut, the blonde guy who wrote the book that she is holding and her husband is holding in the film. You look at the title and it's this hyphenated last name. I forget his name. And she meets him. She says, "Will you sign my book?" And he says, "Good, you stood your ground." So it's the first person who's encouraged her. She hasn't told her husband yet what she's up to. And he's the guy who's been researching the DNA of 500 years of Richard's descendants. And she goes out in Leicester and she goes to the intersection, which is reported to be where the church was, where he might have been buried. And on her way there, after the intersection, she goes to a bridge and she thinks, because Richard's remains were said to be thrown into that river. And she sees the king and he lets himself fall backwards into the river. She rushes to the other side of the bridge and there's no sign of him. So this vision of Richard keeps intruding upon her life, almost goading her to move forward. It keeps us engaged as well because he hasn't abandoned her. We don't either. And then as she's going back, she encounters him across an alleyway and they're talking and he says, you're close, watch out. And a car comes through, so she's to back up. The car leaves, and then he's gone. And it's the alleyway to the parking lot where the king is eventually buried. So he's talking to her. You know, the instincts are speaking, and she doesn't understand them. But she walks out into the parking lot, and it's this open space. She was warned it might be an open space. And there's an R on the ground. And the attendant says, well, that's for reserved for the public health officers. But then there's this lovely, thoughtful shot by the filmmaker. It's we see the R on the ground at her feet in a wide shot, eye level. And then the camera goes over her head like this, where we see the top of her head and the R at her feet. And it slowly twists around and comes back. And it's like a mysterious, disorienting shot, which is made to give us the feeling of what she's feeling. You know, the camera is like it's a messenger of the point of view to give us a visceral reference to the emotions of the character. And then she goes home and the husband says, I know you lied. Do you have a boyfriend? She says, no. And she tells him that there are clues all over the place. and and he makes a joke. That may be later in the film. Is it? I think it is later. I'll save it for when it comes up. But she tells him there are clues all over the place, and the search makes her happy. She feels energized in a way she hasn't in years. That's key, because that's her recognizing, getting an overview on herself, how unhappy she's been, and her lack of confidence, and what her condition has done to her, and the divorce has done to her. Oh, that's where the husband makes a joke as he leaves. He says, oh, I get it, as though he believes her. I understand. He killed the nephews, ground them up, and put them in his pouch on his back to simulate the hump, and walks out. So how is that for a ridicule for somebody who, you know, she's getting deeper and deeper into it, and the person she cares about most, other than her boys, you know, has this mean thing to say about her fantasy. But it drives her deeper into it. She's trying to solicit sponsorship for a dig in this parking lot, even while her son is playing rugby, right? There's a lovely shot where she calls several people and she has to run to the son who gets knocked down. And then the king, somebody tells her it's getting to be an unhealthy obsession. I don't know if it's the king or not. I can't read my note here. The king suggests, it is the king. He suggests to her that it might be an unhealthy obsession to chase after me. And then she gets the rejection by the sponsors. And that's when this family meets around that big 300-ton cannon. And it's a funny thing. They couldn't move it anywhere because it was so big. So it was just an idea gone bad. And Steve Coogan looks over at her and says, you know, again, it's a way of gently chiding somebody you love without ridiculing them as deeply as he did before. It's a waste of time. That's what he called the cannon. It was a waste of time. And then they walk and talk, leaving the castle. The gun is at the top of the castle. And to show you how things don't die, at the same time, two soldiers or policemen are preparing to fire a much smaller cannon. It's a tradition there at noon or whenever to fire a cannon from the heights there over the town. They talk about, well, why do you have to improve his image? None of us are perfect. You know, we lie, we cheat, we steal, we betray, you know, or lesser crimes, you know. And she says, that's precisely my point. He wasn't all evil either. He wasn't perfect either. So that weighs heavily on us for a while. And then she meets Buckley, the archaeologist, the portly guy. And there's music that comes in very faintly when she meets him. You follow the music. The composer is responding to important moments. And she's explaining the case to him, and the king appears in the conversation. They got to the park bench, right? Because she's having a panic attack. And she's explaining her research. And the king is behind the archaeologist, leaning against a tree. He's there as a presence. And she acknowledges him with a look. And he appears twice in that. And then she and the king, have a walk and talk again. And she asks him, did you kill them, the two nephews? And he doesn't answer. And she feels, oh my God, I've offended him. And she runs, I think, and she fetches him. And she says, no, I didn't mean that. You couldn't have killed your cousins, those two nephews, because there are so many other cousins in the clan that had a higher right to accession to the crown. You would have had to kill them all to make room for yourself. He doesn't respond to that. He just leaves. And that's when she goes home and she sees the husband reading the book. So suddenly her support network is coming back. He's being swayed by it. And that's that lovely scene where they sit on the couch and they draw close and they share a kiss. And she says, you don't want to go down this road, do you? And he says, I suppose not. And, it's like that's where they are in their relationship. But it's a sweet moment. And it's like, I've never seen it on camera before. It's too real. And they tease us with the silence between, and he kind of moves a little closer, and is he going to kiss her or not? And when they do, where's it going to go? Are they going to jump to the bedroom? No, it's like they're reasonable adults, and it's not good for their relationship or the boys. And lo and behold, fate comes in, and Buckley loses his funding from the university. He's out, right? And he wants a new assignment that will support his department. So that's when they compare the maps. And if you listen to the music there, it's tension music, where a revelation is about to happen, because they're going to superimpose the old map of the parking lot with a new map, or the church with a parking lot. And it's enough to swing Buckley to support her. And this is a dyed-in-the-wool archaeologist who, has dirt under his fingernails. So then she goes to meet the council of the city of Leicester, or people connected with this. And this guy, Taylor, who represents the university, says, you shouldn't go on your feelings. We can't do that. This is going to cost a fortune. And we don't have any scientific evidence for this. But fortunately, the head of the council is a woman who understands feelings and is impressed by Philippa's belief in her ideas. And she gets the grant, but not before the head of the meeting sits her down in the lounge and says, you got it, but take some advice from me. Don't ever talk about your feelings. Men don't like it when women say, I have a feeling. It's very funny, but very true. And so it's a word to the wise. You want to go through with this and be successful, or at least raise the money and spend it. Don't say you have a feeling about this again. Oh, by the way, I have to mention this, another nice touch for the filmmakers. After she and her ex-husband kiss, she looks out the window again, and there's no king sitting on the bench. So she's looking forward to she wants guidance. What do I do? Not just with my husband, but with the project. So you have to see these things, be willing to see them as a little bit symbolic. And there's a problem. They get the money, celebration ensues, and then they do the radar of the ground, and they couldn't find anything. So the Tourism Society of Leicester pulls out their 35,000. So what are they going to do? And the king makes a lot of appearances next. And he tells her in one of these, you have to have faith in your research, have faith in yourself. And this is really the core psychological issue of this film, in that she doesn't believe she can do it. It's not, she's been so accustomed to thinking herself as tired, defeated, unworthy, unlovable, and not promotable, when clearly she is. She needs this encouragement. And that's after that, the son sees her talking to nobody on the bench outside their home. And he says to Dad, Mom talks to herself. And Steve Coogan has to say, well, we all do at some point, you know. He shines it over. And then the boys, dad takes them to see a new car he wants to buy, and they make a deal at the son's advice to talk him down. And simultaneously, talking about money, two members of the Ricardian Society, the biker and the woman, create a crowdfunding site to raise money from the 3,500 Ricardians all over the world who might contribute money to this. And the next morning she wakes up, there are 508 responses, and she says, it's going to happen. This is the first hopeful expression that she's said the whole movie. And then she realizes as her husband drops her off in Leicester, what happened to your new car? And she realizes that he was the one who spent the loose $5,000 he had to donate to her campaign. And she says, you're a good man. And he says, I think that's fair. Again, it's this understated, cute, sweet, yes, but touching moment that plays totally real, you know, without being sappy. And then they start excavating, you know, and she realizes it might happen. There's lightning in the sky, as though God has spoken. You know, her feelings are illuminated. She goes back to her hotel room and has a phone conversation with her husband. And she says, people always put me last. You know, he says, well, have faith in yourself. And she considers her feelings. You know, this is where there are a couple close-ups of her at moments at the dig, where she's really, you know, can I do this? You know, she's on the cusp of going over to the other side of self-confidence. And they do find I guess the leg bones. Is that right? No. She runs into she has another panic attack. Oh, and she says, yeah, no, I want to dig there. And she forces herself on Buckley and says, no, I have $800, 800 pounds left. Let's go dig there where the bones were found. And then she's so overwhelmed, she runs to a store and has a moment of quiet. And then she sees the king on his white steed in the street. Very funny image. And he looks at her, she looks back, and he nods his head, tosses his head in the direction of the dig, and she follows him. And then there's this lovely moment of tension building when she enters the courtyard and she slowly walks to the pit. And it cuts between her walking to camera and her point of view approaching the archaeologists. And they say, well, he's this, he's that. And she says, he's perfect, you know, and there's a music cue there as well. But what happens? You know, yes, we found the remains. The movie's not over. Now there's a betrayal that goes on. The university begins to wield its weight and insinuate itself into a project that was solely due to her perseverance. And at the news conference, she's not even allowed to sit at the table that announces it. She's shut out. Nobody tells her. And then there's this issue of the burial and news that Buckley signed the exhumation license, so he gets to decide where it goes. And apparently he's given permission, or he neglected to say there should be a coat of arms, and the university doesn't want one because it would disgrace the ruling Tudor family. So, and Taylor, the guy from the university, gives all his reasons. Well, they felt that scoliosis was pretty close to hunchback, so therefore it's close enough. And in terms of killing the nephews, that's suspect. There's some doubt. So we didn't want to give him they didn't want to give him the coat of arms. She said, no, this was part of the deal. We don't know how she fights to get that accomplished, but she does. But she kind of, you know, in public, she disgraces Taylor. And right after that, the schoolgirls come and say, will you speak at our school? And then we cut to this lovely scene in the field of Bosworth. That's where the last battle was fought by the Plantagenets and where Richard III was killed. And she's having a moment there in this lovely green field. And then her king, Richard, comes up in a full suit of armor with his glistening silver and gold helmet, with 7 horsemen behind him and flags. And, she looks up at him and he says to her, you know the truth. That's all that matters. So don't feel bad about the way you're treating her. And he rides off with his entourage. A lovely moment. And you're in it. You're with it. By this time, isn't the king a real character? Hasn't he had an effect on her? He's an agent. He's not just a magical thing that appears, but he has agency in her life. And then at the funeral, who does she see? She sees the actor who played Richard III, who first got her into it. And you see him, oh my God, this is a real person. He's not, you recognize the guy from his hair and his face. And he's carrying a child. And he says, oh, thank you for, she says, you were really believable. She understates it with him. And then Buckley comes up and says, oh, I have to change to go to the banquet. I'll save you a seat. And then there's this very clever filmmakery thing that happens where Buckley is changed into his tuxedo and gets into the limo with Taylor and Buckley's assistant, the woman assistant. And then you see Philippa dressed up and she's riding in a car, not a limo. And they intercut the entrance to the banquet to Philippa's entrance to the girls' school where she's going to speak. So we're deceived. Oh my God, did they let Philippa into the banquet? No. It's the executives that got into the banquet. She's relegated to this audience who really appreciates her. And why she's there to speak? Women's empowerment. How you have to be true to your ideas and your true potential. And that's the movie. So it's one of these process movies. And I just watched a film called In the Name of the Father by not Stephen Frears, but by Jim Sheridan with Daniel Day-Lewis, where he and his father play Irishmen unjustly accused of killing people during the Troubles in Ireland. And they're sent to jail by the British courts and the police who withheld evidence. And what the outcome is going to be, maybe. But it's this process, but it engages you because you're so wrapped up in the plight of the individuals, right? It's like there's an empathy there, much more profound because they're threatened to spend the rest of their lives in that jail than here, where it's just this unhappy housewife who's down on herself. But suddenly in our minds and our feelings, they're made equivalent. Not that her plight is equal to theirs, but while we're watching the movie, she is us. Just like when we're watching the prison drama, they are us, and you engage with the stakes of the game as though they're your own. And, it's kind of trickery, but this is what films do to us. And, we've been talking about this roundabout for years now. And you just think back with all the wonderful films we've seen. That's what they do to you. Remember the film The Insult, the Lebanese film about the Lebanese Christian and the Muslim Palestinian immigrant, and they have an argument on the street, becomes a national trial and scandal, when the two guys just needed to say, I'm sorry. And they do at the end, and the rest of the world is left fighting. It's like, oh my God, these two people become individuals to you. And so it's like, yeah, you're making new friends or new enemies in case of an action movie. But this is what they do. And at the same time, what this film does is the triumph of the prison film is that they get released and proven innocent, right? The triumph of this film is that she is a champion to herself. And the last shot of that film is the coffin lying in state and the coat of arms underneath it. And this subtitle is No Longer a Usurper. So in other words, the royal family acknowledged that he was a legitimate king. and there's justice there. So I don't know. It's like seeing that coat of arms there is like her victory, our victory. That's what makes the film fun. You invest in the struggle, and when it comes out happy, you are happy. Sorry I talk so much, but when I get wound up like this, you guys seem to let me go. Um, okay, Cindy, thank you. But it's like my goal is to engage you into telling the story and to share your feelings along the way, because as I've always said, and I think we may have lost Howard. Oh, no, there he is. Hi. That your feelings are important. How you perceive the movie is not your fault. It's the movie's fault if they don't have you with it. And but this is how movies work on us. They're meant to take us away in an adult, convincing way that isn't total fantasy. And some are. I mean, Barbie was a total fantasy, but it had a subtext which was close to the surface about patriarchy and female empowerment. And girls, you have to realize that you've been tricked all this time to look and act like this when you're real people. So she goes and has a gynecology appointment at the end. Hilarious joke, just hilarious. It's like, just because it's a fantasy doesn't mean it's real, not real to us, because we can invest in a fantasy. And sometimes I think because it is a fantasy like Barbie, it's safer to invest because it's just colors, pinks and yellows and music and dancing. Gorgeous look. It's a real accomplishment to carry off a serious message with such levity and such sarcasm. So that's my goal, is to win you people over to seeing and looking at films this way and allowing yourself to follow your own feelings when you watch them, because that's important. That's your measure. Is it a good movie or not? Did it engage you or not? And then you have to figure out, well, why didn't it? And where did I lose faith in it? Or where did I gain faith in it? We can say, oh, I didn't like it for the first 30 minutes, but the last 60 were really good. Well, you have to look at what changed your mind. So it's just kind of self-analysis that is kind of fun to do. And it's a check on yourself. And I think we all grow from that kind of reflection. Steve Zimmerman, I can see you're aching to say something.
Sorry. Well, yeah, I mean, I had a few, I liked the movie. I enjoyed it. I think some aspects of the movie aren't that great. I thought the relationship between she and her husband is a little syrupy at times. It's not really very profound on that level, though it serves a function of showing a fundamentally happy family, yeah, despite, they're separated. And that there's love and support, and she's a good mom, and she's continuing to be a good mom while she does this struggle to find Richard III. But there were a few main themes that kind of popped out to me. Follow your dreams. Don't get discouraged. You are not your disabilities. Don't let stereotypes or labels keep you down. In fact, they even had that the husband even uses that phrase. Don't let the bastards wear you down, which of course is a famous slogan that says exactly that, right? I noticed that part of the theme about usurpation, I mean, there was a dual kind of usurpation here, right? The allegation that Richard III had usurped the throne, but in a modern day situation, you have the University of Leicester, right, and their main official kind of usurping her entire project, right?
Taking credit for it.
Yeah, there was kind of a dualism here that was not lost on me. Also, there's the issue about who are your friends. The real hero, or one of the real heroes in this movie, isn't just Sally Hawkins, but it's her group who believed in her and came to her rescue when all the funding disappeared, right? They did this fund me thing and they came through. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to do it, right? And so there is a message there. Who are your friends? These people were pretty literate, and they were supportive to her even before the funding went out. and after the funding went out, they kind of rescued her. And so there's that message. Who are your real friends? Well, those are a few of the things that were popping out at me.
Good. Anybody else want to share their favorite moments, or Mitch, are you going to speak up? There you go.
Yes, I didn't follow the point about the disability. I thought she quit her job, and I remember the husband saying, you have to work. You said that she went on disability?
No, she had a disability. It's
Oh,
lack of sleep.
Right.
This chronic fatigue syndrome thing, the
Chronic
ME
fatigue, right.
that she kept talking about.
Yeah, and remember, everybody said you have panda eyes this morning, or you look tired, or it looks like you had a good night, and no, and her boss at work says, I've been covering for you for a while, and she says, but I've never let you down. I've never missed a deadline. And so it's like, that's what's worn down her self-confidence. So, you have to understand, it's delivered verbally, but the rejection is very palpable.
There's also a discussion about workplace politics. I mean, right? I mean,
yeah,
her boss and
the coaching session, you mean?
Yeah, the coaching session, and not getting the promotion, even though she'd always been there to do the job, and somebody who just has been employed for 5 minutes gets the promotion, and this sort of thing. So there was a pretty somewhat scathing depiction of what office politics can be like. Yeah.
Iris? Unmute, Iris. Unmute, lower left corner. The microphone. There you go.
Yeah. I have to come forward and say I have not yet seen this movie, but I enjoyed very much your analysis of it. I do know the story of the actual truth of what happened in the discovery of Richard III's grave and burial. But what I feel about listening to everybody's comments, one of the things that strikes me about this movie, it is a strongly feminist movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very good thing to hear when you have somebody like Sally Hawkins in a small role, in a small place in the world, coming forward and really sticking to it and believing in herself and in what she believes. So I really appreciate that part of it. I haven't planned to watch this movie Sunday night with the group here in Sacramento. So I appreciate everything that has been said so
You know
far.
what? They'll all say it's fun. And you root for her. It's like, what could do, one could do worse. Anyone else? Howard.
I think since we are all living in the 21st century, we know a lot of things, and we have at least many of us have ideas about what reality is and it isn't. But at the same time, I think a very important thing about people, or at least many people, is that we have a need to believe that, for example, luck is a real thing, and to believe that there's God is an actual entity that we can have a conversation with and that will affect our lives. And if you make a movie that grants that wish that people have, people are going to like the movie, or at least I did. I think it's like I used to know. A rabbi of a congregation that I used to belong to was a chaplain at the cancer hospital, Sloan Kettering, for decades. And one of the things he's a Reform rabbi, and he says, well, I would give people amulets and wear them. And I would tell them, of course, as Reformed Jews, we don't believe that there's such a thing as magic or that amulets can affect your cancer. But on the other hand, if you wear it, it can't hurt.
Yeah.
And then he would add, and actually a lot of people got better. So we want to believe that. And you use the word engage. I think we engage with that idea.
We do. We want people to get better. We want to hope, and it's just life intrudes and gets in the way sometimes.
So I thought it was, the movie. You certainly appreciate that it's a kind of
That it's a what?
it's a slapstick movie. It's a comedy.
Yeah.
But it's also actually quite a serious movie, much more
Right.
than 99% of movies that you would see, which is another nice thing about it.
Yeah. It carries the mail.
But the thing that boggles my mind when I read about it later is that, for example, the thing about the R, you're seeing the thing about the R, and she gets it into her head. After all, she's seeing visions of King Richard, so why not? She gets the idea that this is a sign from heaven that that's where the body is. And she insists, despite when they do the digging, they actually have the money to do the digging. The experts say, no, it can't possibly be there. It's too far away from the church. That's just some minor person who is buried there. And she insists, no, I know it's there. I demand to dig up there.
Yeah.
And
That's her pivot.
in real life, if they had dug, they wouldn't have found anything because
Well,
there's no magic. There's no signs from heaven. But in the movie, it's very gratifying. But the amazing thing that's where he was. But when I read about it, apparently that's exactly what happened in real life.
what? The discovery of the bones?
That there was an R that she
Oh, yeah.
that led her to say where to dig. They didn't want to dig there. They dug there, and that's where they found them.
Yeah. How many times have you heard somebody say, you can't write this stuff?
When I saw it, I said, well, this is absurd.
Yeah.
The R in the parking lot, that can't possibly be real. And yet, in the movie tells you, well, it could be real. And you like to hear that.
Yeah, it's fun. But it's like what the agency of it was chance, not divine.
You mean, well, you can always, any miracle can be explained as chance. But that wears out pretty fast. You can't use that too many times.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, let's talk about, oh yeah, Susie.
She's muted.
You're muted still. Lower left corner. You're muted. Can't hear you.
Here. Now you can hear me.
Yes. Good.
Now you can hear me. So I do think that Philippa had a sense of self because she didn't, at the end, when all the credit should have been given to her and that jerk took all the credit for himself, she was big enough inside to know that the project was to find Richard. The project was to get the digging done. She didn't have to put a sign on her chest and say, I'm the one that did it. I'm the one that did it. She swallowed hard. I think that she had more confidence in herself than we're giving her credit for.
Well, no, by the end, I think
in our discussion.
I totally agree with you. She did have so much more confidence. Remember, Buckley says to her, I'll save a seat for you at the banquet. She was invited, but she chose not to go.
Because she knew the more important place
Right.
was with the kids.
Right.
And
remember, Richard on the horse says to her, what counts is that you know the truth. But her insisting on doing the extra $800 worth of digging is really where she pivots and becomes a whole person. She has enough confidence to invest in her own ideas and beliefs and says, no, let's do it this way. I'll roll the whole $800 on it.
But
She was right.
it is true that both in the movie and in real life,
Yeah.
apparently, she devoted the rest of her life to a crusade to unmask the Leicester University and what they had done and what they had done to
Oh,
her.
really? I didn't know that.
That well, it was certainly it showed it in the movie, didn't it?
Yeah.
And apparently, it's also true in real life.
Okay. Now, Howard,
What
did,
other projects? What are other ones, Howard, did she?
That one, no, not that project. She was relitigating that project until finally she got her way, and they put the crest on the tomb and all these things.
uh,
And it went down in the public record that these guys at Leicester were just a bunch of
yeah.
what somebody said jerks.
Okay.
Can I just say that I at some level, I love the fact that it was just a detective story.
Mm-hmm.
And it, reminded me of some of the quirky detectives that we see on television these days, that they all seem to have some, OCD or some characteristic that just makes them off. And she was just a fabulous detective. And oh my God, I mean, I did archaeology. That was my master's degree. And to have made a discovery of something so important historically, just it blows my mind. I mean, and as the archaeologists were saying, we never really look for, just a single individual. We're looking at towns, or we're looking at things on a much broader scale. You're not looking for a single person usually. So I appreciated the archaeology. I appreciated the detective quality. And I'm just thinking, sometimes you read something that's profound and it kind of influences how you see, like a movie, how you view a movie. And I was just reading Edward Said talking about Orientalism, and a part of the argument had to do with the sense of belonging and how powerful that idea of belonging is. And as you were talking about film and what is it about film, I think that part of it is in the best films, we feel that we belong to it in some way. We've experienced the things, not the exact same things, but we belong to how the individual is dealing with the problem, and confronting it. So I wonder the power of that idea of belonging and its relation to film.
Well, I teach this, and a film takes place in your own mind, in the mind of each viewer, right? And when we get so wrapped up in it, of course, we take ownership in our feelings and in the characters that have caused us to feel that way. So it's not, it's just light and sound, flickering on a screen. There's no emotion there. It's what it makes us feel. And that's really the best filmmakers realize how they're manipulating people. The goal is not to be evil and manipulate them, but to make them see and feel something that was obvious all the time, or something inside themselves. And sometimes it's advocacy. It depends. But I think we've seen enough of how she endears herself to us, and the story does, and the characters do. I mean, the only really bad guy is Taylor, the representative of the university, and he's a real person. But, sometimes it's just the system, like In the Name of the Father, the prison film I cited. The breakthrough comes through total chance. Emma Thompson goes to fetch records, and the usual records clerk in the prison isn't there. So the substitute guy gives her a choice between the father's records and the son's records. And nobody looked at the son's records before. So she said, "Oh, I'll look at the son's records." She pulls the son's records and she finds the evidence that the prosecutors lied and falsified evidence and withheld evidence. And that's the breakthrough. So that is like less earned because it's chance, whereas this is into persistence, and that's the message of the film for her, is that the success of the project is because it's her success with herself. Anyone else have a comment? Fern,
I
you're
have a
threatening to talk.
couple of other thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead.
Also, the film, I like the fact that the film pokes fun at academics and traditional academia, and the kind of the smarminess that's sometimes institutionalized by academics, and in a subtle way, it's suggesting the importance that people keep a critical or skeptical eye on what they hear. Some historical interpretations have propaganda built into them, and it replicates things that are inaccurate in the record, historical record. All right, and this movie kind of points that out with regards to the role of propaganda, say in the pictures of Richard III that were manipulated and not questioned, and what the conventional wisdom about him was not accurate, and the value of keeping a skeptical eye and about what you see and hear, and in a related way, it's talking about assumptions that we all make. I mean, people, for example, even when early in the movie she saw the Macbeth play, and the father, one of the families, was saying, well, Shakespeare said has to be right, basically, or what you're criticizing Shakespeare, or it's like whatever Shakespeare said, it must have been right. He wouldn't have said it. That's an assumption, right? And those kinds of assumptions can get replicated in the historical record, and it leads to just mistaken beliefs ultimately, eventually, or it can. So I think it's kind of pointing that out.
Okay. Fern, did you have something to say?
I actually was probably my own mood, but I found the film mildly depressing. I thought that, she had this kind of, you could call it a sweet relationship with her former spouse, but I thought it was kind of depressing. Nobody was able to move on very well, although they were nice enough to each other, and that was nice. I thought that she was, she got kind of shafted at the end, and but she was portrayed as being happy just to be applauded by all the children, which I would have found profoundly, probably too small a recognition for the work she had done, for her piece in it. And there were a whole bunch of nasty people all around, and it just was a little teeny life. I just thought it was a little depressing.
A little depressing and a little too polite.
I thought the thing was she won in the end. I mean,
she did. She won. Ultimately, she did. But the last scene, the scene in the movie that was kind of the big deal was she didn't go to the party where everybody got recognized, and she didn't get her money, but she was glowing because the children were applauding for her. I mean, it's nice, but
I
better
thought
to get a big bonus.
But I
we
read
docents at the Getty Center appreciate that, though.
I read it a little bit differently. I think that having the king's crest on the tomb, that was what was really important to her, that crest needed to be there. And so by the order of the Queen, that crest is there. So in spite of all the kind of the backslapping and kind of discrimination against her. In the end, she was the one that truly won the major debate.
Oh,
Well, the
people tell
royal
women
family-
that all the time, that you get recognition and we tell you you're great and you get some little pat on the back. I think it'd be better to get $1 million bonus, and to be made a partner and to have, the world
Oh.
recognize what you've done.
Having having a press, putting a
You got a
crest-
whole movie.
if you're
the royal
if you're an
family.
archaeologist and you're able to have found this critical king in English history, identify that this was him, which is extraordinary in and of itself.
It was. She just should have been at the banquet. She shouldn't have shunted, and it shouldn't have been that the big deal was that the kids applauded for her. Great.
The royal family actually changed their website.
Yes.
When has that ever happened?
Right.
This is what people tell women all the time. We're going to give you this, we'll give you that. Just pay the bonus.
Okay.
It's all about, well, it depends on how, she doesn't seem to be a person who was motivated by money.
Well, she didn't. Women often aren't.
You sound like a family lawyer.
Don't I?
To the bastards.
Betty?
Yeah,
Betty,
one thing that I found very interesting was I didn't know anything about this whole controversy. I'd heard the story, of course, about the two nephews being killed in the tower, and I didn't know anything about the controversies. I found it interesting because of the learning that it was really that this or something similar. I mean, obviously not the king riding on horseback and all that, but something similar had happened. So I found that very interesting. And I guess what came to mind is, that old expression, history is written by the winners, and Richard was killed, and he did not come out, historically as a very fairly, apparently, according to this. But the other thing I wanted to mention, because we're talking about Shakespeare, that with Merchant of Venice, and of course, how the Jew is portrayed in Merchant of Venice, apparently he never knew anybody Jewish, Shakespeare, but he wrote about, this is, Shylock was the Jew. So, I mean, I like Shakespeare, but, I guess, we have to really, some of the history has to be taken with a grain of salt.
Right. I mean, people have always changed facts for the benefit of stories. It's just part of how you do it. All right, I want to move on to the future. Most importantly, for those of you who are in LA, a week from tonight, on the 18th, there is a live event at the synagogue, the newly remodeled Resnick Synagogue Chapel. And for those of you who are university people will know it as the Gray Family Chapel. It's been totally rehabbed, and it's just gorgeous, comfortable, great sight lines still. And I'll be presenting a program called 600 Years of the Printed Haggadah. And we started in the year 1000 with a fragment of the first Haggadah that has survived. And then we pick it up with Gutenberg and the invention of the printing press. And I cover the last 600 years of the history of Haggadah across the diaspora. And some of you have already received an invitation, and I'll be sending out another one to make sure we put some butts in seats. But it's a lot of fun. These Haggadahs are just mind-blowing. You see Indian women in saris making matzah. You see soldiers throwing babies into river. You see Pharaoh and kings bathing in the blood of Jewish babies to cure them of leprosy. It's like such a snapshot of where every center of Judaism was throughout the last 600 years. It speaks to how each culture saw itself and how they saw their history. Yet it's all the Haggadah. They take the same themes, the same events. The 10 plagues are there. The 4 sons are there. but they're told in different ways. It's a really, I just was knocked out about it when I was creating this. And I did this years ago. I did most of the heavy lifting, and I just revised it for a short program. But you get a real sense of how people, they reported on gruesome things, gruesome examples of anti-Semitism in their Haggadahs. Why? Because that was their life. Even while they're saying, remember, we were slaves in Egypt, it's like, oh, we were slaves now. and we're here, and this is how we interpret what the Haggadah, the Exodus story means to us, whether you're in Bombay or Cairo or Tunisia or Israel or America. A lot of German books, the printing presses were very heavily ensconced in Italy and Germany. And the Jews, by the way, couldn't own printing presses, but they could rent them from Christians. And when anti-Semitism came to town, the Christian owners of the printing press threw out the Jewish publishers, and they had to move to another town where there was no anti-Semitism until the next wave of anti-Semitism came to that town. So it's like a fractal, it's when a part is represented, or the whole, I would say, every part is represented in the whole. There's a relationship, there's a similarity to it. And it's fun, it's visually arresting. We have some video at the Library of Congress with the Washington Haggadah, which is from 1478. And then after the presentation, I have 100 images of ancient, well, not so ancient. It goes up to Israeli Haggadahs in 1948. And there are a lot of Holocaust Haggadahs from the camps and post-camp survivors Haggadah. It's like Jewish history has been projected into one Haggadah. After the presentation,
What night is this?
what? Thursday night. It's live. It might be streamable after the fact, but it won't be. So it's for LA.
I'm going to be in California next Friday.
Oh, it's next Thursday night.
Oh, okay.
Too bad. You're going to see your brother?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell him to visit us sometime.
Okay.
And there'll be a display of a very small and modest collection of Haggadahs that I have, including the Schick Haggadah. Those of you may know about my work with Arthur Schick. He was a Polish artist, campaigned against Hitler from Poland, from France, and then in London, and then the United States. He was a fierce advocate for Jewish human rights and the rights of minorities, including Muslim minorities later on in his life. He was an integrationist and campaigned against African Americans in the army. And he published every day during the war. He published every day in some publication in the United States, his cartoons, political cartoons. And his masterpiece is a Haggadah in blazing color. He created the text, not the interpretation, but the calligraphy in Hebrew, as well as the illustrations, illuminations. They're just gorgeous. And in 2008, my colleague and I, or he was responsible for it, published a new edition based upon the original art that went into this book. And we photographed it on high resolution cameras and then created an edition, I believe, of 300 copies of this fine art book. And I'll be showing my copy of it at the time, as well as the Maxwell House Coffee Haggadah. So when you see them all together on the same table, it's like, oh, I get it. It tells the story of Jewish history better than the Talmud, sort of. That's intellectual history, but this is Jewish history, Jewish life as it was lived by participants. It's very inspiring. It's a lot of fun. I try and make a lot of bad jokes, or some good ones, but I know some of them aren't. And you'll see it's a tour. It's a Cook's tour of the Haggadah history. So that starts at 7 o'clock next Thursday night in this gorgeous new chapel. You will love it. The screen is not big enough yet, but we'll fix that. The sound is not good enough yet. We'll fix that. But it's just a delight to be there. By the way, we had Levies of Monticello there. And I think, Arlene, you came because you were in town, right? And Cindy came. Wasn't it a nice space to see a movie in? Nobody's head is in your way, you know. And it's intimate, you know, there are only 110 seats, and it's like our own private Lemley Theater. So, Betty, you can fly in for it too. And
Well, I was
Barbara, you
wondering
can,
if it would be streaming that we
yeah,
could, let us know if we can see it
yeah,
later. Be
it might be
interesting.
recorded, but it won't stream live. I know that. It's
Okay.
fascinating. And
Well, if it's
where you live
recorded,
again?
let us know.
Florida. Okay. Well, you can get your synagogue to fly me out there and give it. But it's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun giving it, as I do with these discussions. So that's next Thursday. The next film discussion is a week after that. And I have
Familiar
to,
with the or with the Sarajevo Haggadah?
I don't have any copies of it. I couldn't read the
No,
book. It was just people of the book. It was like, I don't care how many affairs you
no,
have.
I'm telling you because it's a wonderful story about
Yes, it is. I don't
the
go there.
Haggadah.
I
Um, and there was such great fear that it was going to be destroyed
yeah, yeah,
in the war
yeah.
between
What year is that? Does that have got a date from?
very early. It's one of the earliest Haggadahs.
1000 or before
Yeah,
14?
something like that.
Yeah,
And there's a YouTube, you can find it on YouTube
yeah.
for Ed Sirota when he worked for Nightline through a various going through bureaucracy after bureaucracy, ultimately got to see it. Because there's been fear that it really didn't exist, that it was destroyed, but in fact it does exist.
Yeah.
And the the paintings and around
The illuminations.
like the illuminations are
Yeah.
spectacular.
Yeah, and the story of its preservation and recovery is interesting. I know that.
Yeah.
I don't include that. Now I realize I should. Um, but just about everything else is in there, the kitchen sink. And I hope you can make it. So the week after next Thursday, we're going to see this remarkable film that my brother-in-law, who's in the movie academy, suggested I see. He saw it, while it was in consideration for best foreign film. It's called The Teacher's Lounge.
Oh,
Somebody saw it? The Teacher's Lounge.
I know somebody who saw it and said it was wonderful.
Yeah, it's on Amazon Prime. And this is a must-see for us because this film is all about how rumors spread virally and do injustice. And it starts with a minor theft at a public school in Germany. It's in German. And all kinds of hatreds and biases come out. Kids are mean, parents are mean, teachers are suspicious, teachers are comforting and supportive. And it's just the lies abound and they get manufactured way out of proportion. And it's astonishing how relevant this is. No mention of American politics, but this is right up our alley. And it's an infuriating film. It is a tense thriller, and there's no action. But you are so engaged in the damage done to this one teacher who's just trying to do the right thing. Her wallet is stolen from the teacher's lounge.
And that's April 25th?
Yes, April 25th. We'll discuss it here at 7:30. And it's a wonderful film. And your ladies who you share the films with, Betty, will love it too. It's not happy like this one.
No, but I've heard it's very good. I know somebody who saw
Yeah,
it,
it's
said it was very
really,
good.
it's a must see for any American who is at all involved or cares about our public dialogue with each other, regardless of your political persuasion. It's really an important film. And it's so smart and so well done with such a light hand. It's just remarkable. So that's in 2 weeks from tonight. And then 2 weeks after that, we're into May. I'm threatened with showing an Israeli film in the chapel for Israeli, Yom Ha'atzmaut or whatever it is. And I'm having trouble finding a good Israeli film. I've shown them all already, I think, but I'm still looking. And so that might be mid-month. So I don't know when our next might be. We do 3 next month with an Israeli film in the middle in the chapel. and the other two will be here. There's one film I've talked about before, heads up. It's called Perfect Days by the German director Wim Wenders. And it's about a man who cleans public toilets near rare subway stations in Tokyo. It's very compelling, if you can imagine how that, it's not about the subway state, the bathrooms. It's about how can this man content himself, this educated, sensitive man, how can he be okay with that being his job? And it really is a reflection upon what makes a life meaningful and how do we live with ourselves and what is enough.
That was in the theaters here where I live, and it was very good. I did see that. It was very
Yeah,
good.
it's weird because nothing much happens. It's one of these plotless movies where everything happens because the panoply of his life is shown to us. It's made by a Westerner, right? Wim Wenders, who did Paris, Texas, and The American Friend, and something with angels in the title. He's a weird, eccentric filmmaker. This is his best and clearest film. And it's very Buddhist, very Zen-like in this man's appreciation, but it's told in a very American style where the tension rises as it goes through the film very slowly, but there is a dramatic curve to it. It's all about his engagement with other people, which starts out to be non-existent, and then goes to a coworker, and then goes to a niece who arrives to visit him, and then goes to his sister who takes the niece back. So there is a curve to it, a development. And by the end, you feel like, oh, I get this guy. I get his life, and it's really remarkable. So I want to share that with you. It may not be for everybody. It's 2 hours plus. Films are getting longer these days. I don't know why, but it's an important film, even though it didn't become the German nominee entrant. So that's where we're headed over the next through May, I think. And my question is, do people want to continue through the month of June and July? I will say that we're going to have a film festival in June, we think, in the chapel, because we want to get other people coming back to the new synagogue. And we're going to show 4 films, 5 films. It may be one a night in 1 week, or maybe one a week for 4 weeks. Pretty heavily Jewish films, some of which we've seen before. Forgive me if I repeat us. But that could be fun. A film a night, in person, live, and a short discussion afterwards in this gorgeous new chapel. So that's what's ahead. Thank
Do
you
you know
for
the dates for May? Do you know
No,
what
I
the
don't know the
dates are?
dates yet.
Not
I
yet.
don't know.
Okay.
You always ask me the hard questions. I have a life too. Susie, yeah? You're muted. You're muted, Susie.
No. Will there be a different screen and a different setup?
No, it will. Things take time. I am lobbying for a new screen, and people know it's too small and too high.
So will it help if we lobby also, if we send some notes to the synagogue?
Sure, it wouldn't hurt.
I mean,
I wasn't
really,
going to offer that. I think it's best addressed to 2 people. Best is what's her first name? Nadell, the executive director. I met her in the Rabbi's
Donna,
Donna Nadell, and Fern, who happens to be on the board.
don't send it to me.
What? Don't give it to her.
Don't give it to me.
But I hope you support the effort.
Do.
It comes up in a board meeting. So she's the first. There is somebody who's in charge of the physical facilities, but I don't know how much influence he has. A man named Doug Lynn.
Doug Lynn is not going to work on your screen.
Yeah,
He
I got that
has big
sense.
issues.
Yeah, he's on bigger issues, or that's
Yeah.
not a big enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a huge punch list for this building.
Yeah.
And it will all get done. You have to be kind and understanding. It's a huge undertaking. We open before it's time, and we'll live with it until it comes up to speed. So believe me, Fern, I'm very kind and understanding at the same time. I want them to feel the pressure because this screen thing is an easy fix. This is the least of their worries, the screen and the sound.
You
Yeah,
can
Mitchell.
say that, Susie, that this is an easy thing to do. They're busy, but this is an easy thing to do.
Well, it's not as hard as it's not like rewiring or
That's right.
making new walls.
Yeah.
It's in the scheme of construction, this is relatively benign and not that costly either to do. At any rate, so Donna Nadell, I think her name is Dean Nadell at wbtla.org. Is that right?
Yeah.
And tell her how much you love the film group and how important it is, and you can't wait to see films in person. But that you saw a screening, if you did, or you were here, the screen is too
Oh,
small.
I heard about it.
Oh, yeah. No, the problem is that if you're in the front rows, you have to crane your head backwards to see it. The back rows is comfortable, but it has to be changed. Mitch, did you have a comment?
From Palm Desert, where we hit 98 degrees today, I say thank you and good night to all.
Okay, good night, Mitch. Say good night to
Yeah, I
Josh,
have
too.
to leave too, but I
Night,
want to wish everybody a
everybody.
happy Passover.
Yes, happy
Happy
Passover.
Passover and good night.
Good night.